The whole story is FIB. The nurse reports Meghan's miscarriage and says it's all wrong. Hello and welcome to the Royal Family News YouTube channel today. A nurse who wished to remain anonymous pointed out that Meghan had faked a miscarriage or was carrying a small package and encouraged Terry to dig with her bare hands. The nurse explains the first trimester. Miscarriages are not uncommon. What is rare, however, is that the products of conception are passed down to the family. She says, there is a point during the second trimester when a miscarriage effectively becomes a stillbirth, and at that time the birth should be registered and the body handed over to a funeral home. The time of pregnancy when an aborted fetus is considered a stillbirths vary by jurisdiction. Alright, now I'm not trying to play. Embarked. The fetus is classified as medical waste and must, by law, be disposed of in accordance with Department of Health policy and state law. The whole story is made up. It is now highly likely that Meghan had a miscarriage but left the hospital with a small package and they then buried it. Yes, I don't think so. And this nurse added that even if they received the body, they would have dug a hole with their bare hands and buried it under a tree where any animal could smell it and eat it. You cannot dig a deep hole with your hands. At least you better preserve your son's remains. Anyone who has ever gardened and removed a well-established shrub knows that it is impossible to dig up the ground near the trunk with your bare hands and make any kind of hole. And it's not only that it's a hard thing to do, it's actually not possible unless you use a pickaxe or something similar, but it would break the roots and damage the tree. Now in the next few months I will have to remove a large tree from my garden and probably start digging up the ground around it. I'm at least 3 feet in any direction. Also, one issue that everyone seems to ignore because they're so focused on the home or hospital burial scenario is that Meghan actually told 2 different stories about this alleged miscarriage. So, the first story she told was that she had a miscarriage after taking care of her baby at home. And then the second story she told was that she had a miscarriage in the aisle and fell into the arms of one of her friends who had just arrived. Harry's book, of course, says something completely different. So what is it? We have already noticed that Meghan Markle tends to tell more than one version of its truth. Let's think about the 2 different versions of how Meghan and Harry met. So Meghan told us that she had asked her friend to find her someone nice. And then we learned from Harry that he found it because a friend of his showed him pictures of Meghan with a bunny or puppy filter on his Instagram. We will never find out the truth about this woman. The nurse also shared, and as someone who has had an abortion, I find it violently offensive that anyone would think of trying to take away the pain and misery. Such a situation inevitably causes me only a very sick and disturbed attempt at such an outrageous scheme. This is not only wrong, but actually extremely disrespectful to anyone who has experienced this particular, often unacknowledged sadness. It is also a sure sign of how this individual will stoop to draw attention to himself in the midst of my petty, sad, and crazy thoughts. Case. Probably all 3. This nurse is right. It's a horrible thing for any woman to go through, but if we're going to be philosophical about it, we have to realize that so many women must be suffering from it. And what a scary thing to do to write a specific article about this experience in the New York Times, especially for someone who claims to want privacy. It's really a laughingstock. And even though I have sympathy for her, if she was really wrong, they would both keep their mouths shut. Meghan and Harry love sharing these stories of shock and amazement, don't they? The sad thing is that half the time, probably more than half the time, they're completely made up. Why don't they realize how ridiculous they look with these exaggerated and embellished stories? The stories they tell are simply out of this world. It's almost like they got their stories from fairy tales or something, or maybe nursery rhymes to be a more apt description. Also, Harry tells some really ridiculous stories in this book, but we still have to remember that Harry is no good. He suffers from a serious mental illness and his master is a mean person. I don't think any of them can think rationally. I mean, they lie about things that are against the law, like the private wedding ceremony they supposedly had in the yard and also carrying the aborted fetus. They tell very dangerous lies. I mean, what was Harry thinking about Ho? Like the Taliban, and also tell just ridiculous lies like the dog collar and dog bowl story. I guess they were trying to humiliate the royal family and make it look bad, but they failed. Now they're just putting themselves in a bad light. If paperwork was needed to get Harry admitted for his mental health issues, then you really could just give the doctors a backup, which should be more than enough, and go back to the story of the Elle burying her fetus under a tree with her bare hands. There are too many weird things in this story. It makes no sense, it's impossible. So probably the most important thing is that it happened during the pandemic. At that time, hospitals did not allow entry to any visitors, even patients on the verge of death. Another thing is that it is illegal to bury human remains outside of a cemetery in the state of California. A third issue is that fetal remains are considered biohazardous waste and should not be given only to family fetuses. He was less than 20 weeks old, so the body will go to pathology. It now remains to release a more developed fetus for an official burial, but the appropriate paperwork must first be completed. And if that weren't enough, banyan trees aren't even native to California, and there are no banyan trees on Montecito's property. So Harry claims they went to some sort of secret public park. And one more thing, does anyone believe that Harry would actually dig a grave with his bare hands? We are going now, and I agree with the nurse. I mean, what an insulting story for the women who had to go through this horrible heartbreak. None of them have ever received fetal remains to bury in the backyard. As this book suggests, it just doesn't work that way. It's a ridiculous lie, but it's really typical of them. What I think is that Meghan was never pregnant, and I don't think she ever had a miscarriage. The way they tell this story is not quite the eagle of the outlet. That things really happened that way. But since Meghan had never been to an American hospital, I guess she didn't really understand what things were like now, considering how much they loved to share. Very interesting that Meghan has never heard of what it was like to be pregnant or give birth, and I think we all know that Meghan would love to give us every little detail to prove that she lived the most incredible pregnancy and birthing experience. And then how about this story that Harry fell asleep while Meghan was taking a pregnancy test? I mean, what does that say about him? What kind of drugs was he taking? I mean, the whole process takes less than 5 minutes. How the hell did he fall asleep? Was he really messed up in something? This only adds to the evidence that Meghan was never actually pregnant. Then Harry tells the story that he just woke up and oh listen honey, I'm pregnant. I think I understand now why the nigger J.R. Moringer had to resign. I couldn't stand this nonsense either. Now, if a winning author wants their name attached to this work of fiction. The other thing, I'm curious what exactly Harry is to make him believe anyone can believe this must be something strong enough. What do you think of this story? Please tell me your opinion below in the section. If you find my video useful, don't forget to like it and share it with everyone who can enjoy it whenever you want, and don't forget to subscribe to the Royal Family News channel for more updates in the future. Once again, thank you very much for listening. Goodbye, and we'll see you again tonight.